We shall see if this works. I just kind of put a hat over you guys to try to help keep some of the sun off, to try and make you guys a little cooler. Let's actually also roll down the windows. But I did want to apologize to you guys. It's been a crazy week trying to get this phone, the Kyocera DuraForce Pro 2, to work. If you want to see that video, go to Papa Ben's Vlogs, and I go through an explanation of the almost week that it took to get me a working phone. Anyway, you guys, we have Les Mis that you guys want, and we're on Fantine, book 1 of Fantine, I should say. Here we go again, because I have now read the whole book 1 of Fantine twice already. As we have said, the house he lived in consisted of a ground floor and a second story. 3 rooms on the ground floor, 3 on the second, and an attic above. Behind the house was a garden of about 1/4 of an acre. The 2 women occupied the upper floor. The bishop lived below. The room that opened upon the street was his dining room. The second was his bedroom, and the third his oratory. You could not leave the oratory without passing through the bedroom, or the bedroom except through the dining room. At one end of the oratory was an enclosed alcove with a bed for an occasional guest. The bishop kept this bed for the country cures when business or the needs of their parish brought them to deny. The former hospital pharmacy, a little building adjoining the house and extending into the garden, had been transformed into a kitchen and storeroom. In the garden, there was also a stable, the former hospital kitchen, where the bishop now kept a few cows. Invariably, every morning, he sent half the milk they gave to the sick at the hospital. "I pay my tithes," he said. His room was quite large and difficult to heat in bad weather, as wood is expensive in Denai. He conceived the idea of having a room with a tight plank ceiling partitioned off from the cow barn. In the coldest weather, he spent his evenings there, and called it his winter parlor. In this winter parlor, as in the dining room, the only furniture was a square white wooden table and 4 rush-seated chairs. The dining room, however, was furnished with an old sideboard stained red. A similar sideboard, suitably draped with white linen and imitation lace, served for the altar that decorated the oratory. His rich penitents and the pious woman of Denai had often contributed money for a beautiful new altar for his oratory. He had always taken the money and given it to the poor. "The most beautiful of altars," he said, "is the soul of an unhappy man who is comforted and thanks God." In his oratory he had 2 prie-dieu rush chairs, and an armchair, also rush-seated, in the bedroom. When he happened to have 7 or 8 visitors at once, the prefect, the general, the major of the regiment in the garrison, or some pupils from the secondary school, he had to go to the stable for the chairs in the winter parlor, to the oratory for the prie-dieu, and to the bedroom for the armchair. This way he could gather up to 11 seats for his visitors. With each new visitor, a room was stripped. It happened sometimes that there were 12. Then the bishop conceded the embarrassment of the situation by standing before the fire if it were winter, or by walking with his guests in the garden if it were summer. There was another chair in the guest's alcove, but it had lost half its rushes, and had only 3 legs, so it could only be used propped against the wall. In her room, Mademoiselle Baptiste had a large easy chair, which had once been gilded and covered with flowered silk, but as it had been hoisted into her room through the window, the stairway being too narrow, it could not be counted among the movable furniture. It had once been Mademoiselle Baptiste's ambition to be able to buy a parlor sofa, with cushions of Utrecht velvet, roses on a yellow background, while the mahogany should be in the form of swans' necks. But this would have cost at least 500 francs. And as she had been able to save only 42 francs and 10 sous for the purpose in 5 years, she had finally given up. But whoever obtains the ideal? Nothing could be plainer in arrangement than the bishop's bedroom. A French window opening onto the garden. Facing this, an iron hospital bed with green serge curtains, and the shadow of the bed behind a screen, the grooming articles that betrayed the elegant habits of the man of the world. 2 doors, one near the fireplace, leading into the oratory, the other near the bookcase, opening into the dining room. The bookcase, a large closet with glass doors filled with books. The fireplace, cased with wooden mantle painted to imitate marble, usually without a fire. In the hearth, a pair of androns decorated with 2 vases of flowers, once plated with silver, which was a kind of episcopal luxury. Above the mantle, where one usually puts a mirror, a copper crucifix, with traces of silver attached to a piece of threadbare black velvet in a wooden frame from which the gilt was almost gone. Near the French window, a large table with an inkstand strewn with papers and heavy volumes. In front of the table was the rush-seated armchair. In front of the bed, a prie-dieu from the oratory. On either side of the bed hung 2 portraits in oval frames. Small gilt inscriptions on the background of the canvas indicated that one portrait represented the Abbé de Cleriot, Bishop of St. Claude, and the other the Abbé Tortiu, Vicar General of Agby, Abbey of Grand Champs, Christian Order, Diocese of Chartres. The bishop found these portraits when he succeeded the hospital's patients in this room, and left them untouched. They were priests and probably donors to the hospital. 2 reasons why he should respect them. All that he knew of them was that the king had given the one his diocese, the other his clerical benefits, on the same day, April 27th, 1785. When Madame Magloire had taken down the pictures for dusting, the bishop found this odd detail written in faded ink on a little square of paper, yellowed with age, stuck with 4 seals to the back of the portrait of the Abbey of Grand Champs. At his window, he had an antique curtain of coarse woolen material, which finally became so old that, to save the expense of a new one, Madame Magloire put a large patch in the very middle of it. The bishop often called attention to the patch, which was in the form of a cross. How apt, he would say. Every room in the house was whitewashed, as is the custom in barracks and in hospitals. Later, however, as we shall eventually see, Madame Magloire found under the wallpaper some paintings decorating Mademoiselle Baptiste's room. Before it was a hospital, the house had been a sort of gathering place for the town's leading citizens, hence these decorations. The floors of the rooms were paved with red tiles, which were scoured every week, and straw matting was spread beside the beds. The two women kept the house exquisitely neat from top to bottom. This was the only luxury the bishop would permit. He would say, "That takes nothing from the poor." Yet we must confess that of his former possessions he still kept a set of silver cutlery for 6 and a ladle, which Madame Magloire contemplated every day with new joy as they shone on the coarse white linen tablecloth. And as we are drawing the portrait of the Bishop of Denay just as he was, we must add that more than once he had said, "It would be difficult for me to give up eating with silver." To the silverware should be added 2 massive silver candlesticks inherited from a great aunt. These held wax candles and stood on the bishop's mantel. When anyone came to dinner, Madame Gloria lit the 2 candles and placed the candlesticks on the table. In the bishop's room, at the head of his bed, there was a small cupboard in which Madame Magloire put away the silver cutlery and the large ladle every evening, but the key was never taken out of it. The garden, somewhat marred by the ugly structures already mentioned, was laid out with 4 walks, crossing at a dry well in the center. Another walk around the garden skirted the white wall that enclosed it. These walks left 4 square plots bordered with boxwood. In 3 of them, Madame Magloire grew vegetables. In the 4th, the bishop had planted flowers. And here, Madame Magloire once said to him in a kind of gentle reproach, "Monseigneur, you are always eager to make everything useful, yet here is a useless plot. It would be much better to have salads there than bouquets." "Madame Magloire," the bishop replied, "you are mistaken. The beautiful is as useful as the useful." He added after a moment's pause, "Perhaps more so." This plot, consisting of 3 or 4 beds, occupied the bishop nearly as much as his books. He would spend an hour or 2 there, trimming, weeding, making holes in the ground, and planting seeds. He was not as hostile to insects as a gardener might have wished. He had no botanical pretensions, and knew nothing of species and classification. He did not care to decide between Torin Fort and the natural method. He took no sides, either for the Utricules against the Cytolins, or for Jesu against Linnaeus. He did not study plants. He loved flowers. He had great respect for the learned, but still more for the ignorant, and, while fulfilling his duty in both directions, he watered his beds every summer evening with a tin watering can painted green. No door in the house had a lock. The door of the dining room, which, we have mentioned, opened onto the cathedral grounds, was formerly fortified with bars and bolts, like the door of a prison. The bishop had had all this ironwork taken off, and the door, night and day, was shut with only a latch. Any passer-by, whatever the hour, could open it with a simple push. At first, the 2 women had been worried because the door was never locked. But the Bishop of Denay said to them, "Have bolts put on your own doors if you like." Eventually, they shared his confidence, or at least acted as if they did. Madame Magloire alone had occasional attacks of fears. As for the bishop, his reasoning is explained, or at least indicated, in these 3 lines he wrote in the margin of the Bible. This is the difference. The door of a physician should never be closed. The door of a priest should always be open. In another book, The Philosophy of Medical Science, he wrote this: "Am I not a physician as well? I too have my patients. First, I have the physicians, whom he calls the sick, and then I have my own, whom I call the unfortunate." And again he wrote, "Do not ask the name of him who asks you for a bed. It is precisely he whose name is a burden to him who must needs sanctuary. It occurred to a worthy curé, I am not sure whether it was one of the Couleur or Pompieri, to ask him one day, probably at the insight of Madame Glory, if the bishop were quite sure that there was a degree of imprudence in leaving his door, day and night, open to whoever might wish to enter, and if he did not fear that some evil would befall a house so poorly defended. The bishop touched him gently on the shoulder and said, "Unless God protects a house, they who guard it watch in vain." And then he changed the subject. He would oft say, there is a bravery for the priest as well as for the colonel of dragoons. Only ours should be peaceable. Interesting. Out here in the country, out in the middle of nowhere, we have a lot of I want to say a lot of doors and such that are not closed. A lot of doors that are not locked. But then again, there's not that many people around, nor if we knew or saw someone come in, it would be that specific person or we would know them. Now, if you live in a bigger city or a bigger area, you guys kind of have the opposite, where you do make sure that things are locked up and things are not open because there is a lot more people, so you can't be sure that everyone that comes down your street, be it a dead end or not, you know. So, would it be prudent to not lock the door and assist those that needed help? Or, in this day and age, where we are, or where you guys are, would it be prudent to lock your doors, but assist those who need help outside, not inside your home? Interesting thoughts, interesting little play-ons. Anyway, I wanted to thank you guys so much for tuning in. You all have a wonderful and blessed day.